I want to watch this with you guys. I know most of you have seen it already, but I've seen it already. But I want to talk about Mimighoul a little bit. I want to talk about Mimighoul from the Infinite Forbidden, the new TCG exclusive archetype. I want to preface this by saying a few things about TCG exclusive archetypes. And I've said this like last week or so when they announced the Mimighoul cards in the trailer without actually showcasing their effects. I said, hey, these cards look cool. The whole thing of like a dungeon crawler archetype and all that sounds fun to me, but I'm not going to cope on TCG exclusive archetypes ever again. I've kind of lost my I've got trust issues with TCG exclusive archetypes, specifically because of Ascent, simply because that deck looked so cool and I really wanted it to be good. And I'm the kind of person, I'm really good at talking myself into coping on stuff that I just want to be good or want to be true, you know, in case you haven't noticed. So I told myself, you know what, I'm not gonna cope that these decks are gonna be made viable. I'm just hoping for something cool. And so we're gonna watch through the Mimighoul gameplay mechanics video, which is actually a very well made video about the Mimighoul archetype together, and yeah, maybe talk about it a little bit on what we've got here and whether we think it's good or cool or whatever. I'll speed it up just slightly.
Normally, adventurers head into dungeons to loot treasure chests. But when you play with the Mimighouls, it's the treasure chests, or rather their inhabitants, that'll be doing the looting. The Mimighoul style of gameplay revolves around gifting your opponent wonderful, beautiful treasure boxes that give them a nasty surprise when they're opened. Let's take a look at Mimighoul Archfiend to see how this works in practice.
Alright, so spoilers. Most of the Mimighouls in this set are gonna have the same sort of style to them. They are all fiend monsters that have different effects based on how you use them. They all have the effect to, during your main phase, you can special summon them from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in face down defense position. And then they have two other effects. One of them is their flip effect, which is really bad for the they're not all fiends. Okay, never mind. Okay, whatever. That's irrelevant. They're all earth. Okay. Anyways, they have that effect. You can summon them to your opponent's field and face down. And they have a flip effect, which is really bad when you're the player who is flipping the Mimighoul. So you never want to flip the Mimighouls yourself, which inherently, when you're making a flip deck, that's good. Look, you're playing a flip deck, but you don't need to actually flip your own monsters. That's important. You don't want to set a monster and then wait. That's an important thing to do. And they're all special summons as well, right? They're all special summons. You don't have to use your normal summon on these. You give these to your opponent, and then when they flip face up, they do something really bad to your opponent. And then the most important thing I feel like about these cards is that that's not the only thing that they do. They all have another effect that you can do if you normal or special them face up, right? Like, for example, Mimighoul Archfiend. The flip effect is the following. If it's the main phase, your opponent draws one card, which if you're the Mimighoul player, you are drawing the card because you're giving this to your opponent. So the opponent in this case is you. Send one card from your hand to the graveyard, and then give control of this card to your opponent. So Mimighoul Archfiend flips on your opponent's side of the field, makes them discard, you draw, and then it comes to your side of the field, which is a good sequence of stuff that's happening. And then if this card is normal or special summoned, you can change a face down monster on the field to face up, attack, or defense position. You can only use each effect once per turn. So if you have a Mimighoul Archfiend in your hand, you get to choose, do I want to summon it face up on my side of the field and use that effect, or do I want to give it to my opponent in order to try and flip it up later? So really cool, honestly.
All about flip monsters. Unlike most flip monsters, you absolutely do not want these ones to flip face up on your side of the field. Take a look at this flip effect. If Mimighoul Archfiend flips face up during the main phase...
Yeah, I guess we talked about that. Yeah, the video is very well made, so I'm like repeating.
Finally, Mimighoul Archfiend scurries over to the other side of the field. It's a devastating swing in the that face down defense you've gifted them flips face up. Of course, your opponent isn't likely going to want to ever flip it face up, so the Mimighoul strategy has a number of ways to encourage them to open up their presence. In fact, there's even one built in to Mimigul Archfiend. Mimigul Archfiends actually work well together in pairs thanks to this final effect. You can special summon one to your opponent's field face down.
And you really can't stress how important it is that they made these cards multi-purpose in just from a card design perspective. And that does not mean that the archetype itself is super good and all that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just conceptually, card design wise, it's super important that they're not just like single purpose. You can only summon them all to your opponent, and if you don't have the cards to flip them up, then it's completely sucks, right?
Do that, and you draw a card, while your opponent sends one from their hand to the graveyard, and then you get that flipped Archfiend on your side of the field, where you now have 2 level 1 monsters available to do whatever you wish. Your opponent has also activated a monster effect during your main phase, albeit against their will. So you could even follow up with Triple Tactics Talent to dispose of another card from their hand and plan out the rest of your turn.
This archetype is making great use of talents, right? Because you're giving your opponent monsters that activate. It doesn't make great use of thrust, I think, simply because the monsters, after they activate, they go over to your side of the field, so your opponent won't have a monster on the board necessarily, unless you can give them another Mimigul, right? Before flipping it up, right? You can give them, let's say you give them 2 Mimiguls, you flip one of them face up, and then you can activate Thrust. That works, but that's more effort, right? You need more cards to do that.
There are 3 Mimigul flip monsters in the Infinite Forbidden, and they each have their own unique ways of causing trouble for your opponent, while either progressing or protecting.
All right, so these are the 3 flip Mimiguls. There's one more main deck monster that I don't think has a flip effect, but so they all have the same style, they all have the same setup. They can all special summon themselves to the opponent's field and face down. Dragon destroys all face-up monsters you control, so all face-up monsters your opponent controls, and if it's normal summoned, it adds normal or special, it adds a Mimigul spell trap from your deck to your hand, so this is really good, right? Searcher on summon and field wipe on the board. Cerberus is, I think, the wackiest one of them, because it says banish the top 3 cards of your deck, then special summon one of your banished monsters to your opponent's field and defense position. This one is, I think, the most awkward one, because it's not guaranteed to provide value for you. Like, Archfiend always is a huge swing, because your opponent draw one, the opponent discards one. That's really good. Destroying all face-up monsters is really good removal, but then Cerberus is kind of awkward, you know, because also keep in mind, banish the top 3 cards of your deck, then special summon one of your banished monsters to your opponent's field and defense position. Your opponent is the player, so they can choose. They choose which card they give you, right? Out of the 3 monsters, out of the cards that they banish. So if they banish, let's say they banish, I don't know, an Effect Veiler, they can just give you the Effect Veiler, right? You play against Branded, they give you Gimmick Puppet. Imagine. So yeah, and this also has the I think the weakest summon effect of the 3, right? Because this one can flip cards face up. This one adds, which is really good. This one just says your opponent cannot target face up spells you control with card effects. So this one is by far the worst one. If there is any card in the first wave of Mimigul support that's disappointing, it's definitely Cerberus.
Mimigul Cerberus flip effect banishes 3 cards from the top of the controller's deck, then forces its controller to hand over one of their banished monsters to the opponent before switching control. Its continuous effect keeps the opponent from targeting your face-up spell cards with card effects. The latter effect will help you keep the field spell that shows the Mimigul's home turf safe and sound. Mimigul Dragon's flip effect, on the other hand, destroys all of its controller's face-up monsters, except for Mimigul's, of course, before it heads over to the other side of the field. This monster is very safety conscious, don't you think? Dragon also has an effect when it's normal or special summon to add a Mimigul spell or trap from your deck to your hand. The Mimigul spell and trap cards are vital to victory, so you'll be using this effect a lot. The home turf of the Mimiguls is the Mimigul Dungeon field spell. Inside the dungeon, players are compelled to flip monsters face up. Why? Well, it's not the spirit of adventure, that's for sure. It's because Mimigul Dungeon prevents players who control face-down monsters from normal summoning or attacking with monsters they special summon during the current turn. So what your opponent is going to want to do is try and flip summon any Mimiguls you give them first, so they can play their turn in as much peace as they can after going down a card and possibly having to give away a key monster from their deck. Given that, there's one very important rule that we need to know regarding when you're allowed to manually change the battle position of a monster, since that's what a flip summon is. You can't flip summon a monster the turn it was placed on the field.
What was that, Jojo?
be that special summoning it face down or just setting it from your hand. You also can't flip summon a monster that you just normal or special summoned that was subsequently flipped face down by a card like Book of Moon. If you go first and give your opponent a Mimigul, they're going to try to get rid of it as fast as possible, and if they can avoid flipping it, for example by sending it to the graveyard with the Belstar the Black Witch, then they'll try to do that. Knowing this, you'll want to have a method on hand of giving them another face-down monster.
Basically, long story short, while your opponent has a face down, they can't normal summon and they can't attack with special summon monsters. So even if you, I don't know, if you give them a face down monster and you don't have a way for them to force them to flip them up, if they want to normal summon or if they need to normal summon to play, they have to flip it. Right? So that's good. But also, if you can, which this deck does have, I think, ways to special summon monsters to your opponent's side of the field in face down position on your opponent's turn. And because the monsters were summoned that turn, they can't flip them even if they want to, right? So you can give them a face down monster, and while you have this card, they can't normal summon, which is powerful. But I think the most important part about this card is that it has a once per turn add Mimigul monster from deck or graveyard to your hand, which is obviously phenomenal. So it's a once per turn. It's basically Spiral Resort plus I'm gonna call it a mini floodgate, right? Because it's somewhat hard to maintain the set monsters at all times, and a lot of decks can play without their normal summons. Not every deck, but it's good.
Or flipping one of their monsters face down.
It's a good card,
if you
for
succeed,
sure. Like,
they won't
really
be able
good.
to flip summon that monster, and they'll have to play by the rules of the dungeon. Speaking of the rules of the dungeon, they also specify how your low attack flip monsters are going to get the attack points they need.
Oh yeah, and it makes the Mimiguls kind of
Mimigul
huge.
monsters that weren't summoned or set in the current turn gain attack points equal to their defense points. So Dragon becomes 2500 attack, Cerberus becomes 2200 attack, and Archfiend becomes 1900 attack. Not bad for a group of level 1 monsters. Finally, while Mimigul Dungeon is in play, you'll get to add a new Mimigul monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand each turn. This is a strategy that needs a lot of monsters to work, and Dungeon will make sure you never run out. In fact, having access to monsters is so important that there's not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different Mimigul cards that add Mimigul monsters to your hand and or special summon them to the field. Here are 2 of the others. Mimigul Maker.
Reveal 2 flip monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent randomly picks one for you to special summon to their field face down defense position, and you add the other one to your hand. Then you can special summon a Mimigul from your hand. If your opponent special summons a monster except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target a face down monster your opponent controls, change it to face up attack or defense position. You can only use 1 maker effect per turn and only once that turn. This card is also, from my understanding, pretty insane. Simply because it doesn't technically go +1, but I think it classifies as +1. Like you give your opponent a Mimigul and you get a Mimigul. I think that's +1. That in the long term, that's probably even more than +1. This can be any flip. The problem with any flip, guys, the problem with any flip is that most flip monsters are good for the person that has them, right? So if you give them like a good flip monster, it's kind of weird. Of course, you can maybe do some nasty stuff like, I don't know, morphing jar stuff, I don't know. But it's random. You have no control over it, right? Like you can't know, you don't know which one you're giving your opponent and which one you get. So on the safe side, let's keep it within the archetype for now. If you're just revealing 2 different Mimiguls, it's really good for you, right? Because you give them one that has a bad effect for them and you get one that has a good effect for you. So this card is phenomenal, and it also has a graveyard effect on the following turns to change stuff face up. So this is good. And then we've got Mimigul Room, which is special summon a Mimigul monster from your hand or deck to your field or in face down defense position to your opponent's field. Then you can change a face up monster on the field to face down defense position. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target any number of Mimigul cards you control, return them to the hand. You can only use 1 Mimigul Room effect per turn and only once that turn. It's a trap card, so it's not as, I mean, it reads good, but it's still a trap. But I do think this card is good, right? Because you can book one of your opponent's monsters as well. Like give them a Mimigul face down, or summon it face up to your field, and then you can even book one of your opponent's other monsters if you want to, and it's got a graveyard effect, because all of the Mimighouls, obviously, they go back to your side of the field after you flip them on your opponent's side, so adding them back to your hand is really nice, right? So I think both of these cards are pretty strong.
You get 2 different flip monsters out of your deck, and randomly summon one to your opponent's field face down, while the other is added to your hand. After that, you can special summon any Mimighoul from your hand. With this one,
have you looked at Exodia yet? Yeah, I've seen your profile.
One card, you could conceivably lay a trap on your opponent's field and spring it at the same time without using your normal summon. Maybe you could use that to your advantage by adding some adventurers to your deck. If you're a real risk taker, you can include non-Mimighoul flip monsters in your deck and find them with this card. Maybe you want to fetch Cyberjar out of your deck and don't care whose field it ends up on. Or maybe you want to roll the dice on simulating the effect of Delinquent Duo by pulling Fire Sorcerer from your deck and hoping it ends up on your opponent's field. Your opponent
See,
will
that's
have a
the
hard time
thing.
keeping
You
the
can do a
monster
lot of funny stuff with this card, but I don't think you want to rely on a 50-50 or something to give your opponent something really crazy or receive something really crazy. I don't think you want to do that.
Down, because Mimighoul Maker also has a graveyard effect that lets you switch the battle position of a face-down monster your opponent controls if they special summon a monster. Mimighoul Room is the perfect card to confound your opponent. It can special summon any Mimighoul from your hand or deck to either player's field, face up if it's on your side, letting you use its beneficial effects, or face down on your opponent's side, looking to cause trouble. As we discussed earlier, you can't flip summon a monster the turn it was special summoned face down, even if your opponent special summoned it to your field. So a monster given to the opponent with Mimighoul Room is going to stay face down until acted on by another effect. This card is great for keeping your opponent trapped in the dungeon, even after they voluntarily flip their Mimighouls face up. And it also has a graveyard effect that lets you return any number of Mimighoul cards you control to your hand. This second effect is useful because the roles played by each of the monsters changes as the duel progresses. For example, if you're going first, you don't want to give your opponent Mimighoul Dragon because they can flip it without consequence on their turn. You do want to summon it to your field to get a Mimighoul spell or trap card. If you're going second, you do want to give Dragon to your opponent so you can clear their existing monsters out before trying to lock them up in the dungeon. But when your next turn rolls around, you'll need the effect to grab a spell or trap card to keep your strategy rolling. The graveyard effect of Mimighoul Room lets you switch the role your monsters play, without needing to add a second copy of that monster to your hand with one of your other effects. The final Mimighoul card in the Infinite Forbidden is the mastermind behind the mayhem, Mimighoul Master.
Nah, this one's not a flip.
It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects if your opponent controls any face-down monsters, or you control any other Mimighouls. While in the dungeon, its attack rises to 3,000. As you might expect, the Master of the Mimighouls can grab another Mimighoul monster from your deck when it's normal or special summon, and can also dictate when, during your opponent's main phase, that face-down monster should flip up. Obviously, this is great for triggering Mimighoul effects.
So it's a Stratos that's going to be 3k under the field spell, and can't be destroyed by battle or card effects. And it can even manipulate set monsters during your opponent's main phase. So another great card. So all things considered, I want to say a few things about Mimighoul. First of all, I want to compliment the video. I thought it was actually very well made. Like, I genuinely, I just watched this video for the first time, like when it came out, and I think it did a really good job at just explaining the thing, you know, which is, I mean, not always a given, but I thought it was just, I thought it was well made. I thought, like, it takes us all, it's 9 minutes, almost 10 minutes long, but still, I thought it was well made and well done. The Mimighoul archetype. The Mimighoul archetype, my first impression, and I've already worded some of my thoughts on over on Twitter, but I am a fan of this archetype, not from a competitive standpoint, right? Like, I mean, maybe, but that's always a maybe with the first wave of cards. Like, I don't think with these 7 cards that this deck is going to be like a top tier archetype or whatever, right? If you want to hope for a second wave that's going to make it insane, that's fine, because they do have some solid cards here. You know, Master is a really good card, Maker is a really good card, Dungeon is a really good card. The gimmick itself seems very fun, and they've definitely got some good flip effects. Like Archfiend is a really good, like, sort of setup and control kind of thing because it manipulates hand sizes. Dragon is a field wipe. Cerberus is kind of here. Cerberus is like the bad card out of the bunch. The trap card is also okay. I think it is a deck that seems incredibly fun, but also my main takeaway from this is that I just find the concept really cool, right? And I think sometimes we are so focused on always evaluating every single deck by its competitive viability and all that kind of stuff, and that's natural. That's a natural thing, right? Most of us are competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players, right? We look at it through the lens of, is this deck going to be tier 1 or not? And the answer here is probably no, at least with this first wave. But the concept is just insane, right? Like the work on this, the work that went into this, the thought that went into this archetype of like how they wanted it to work and all that kind of stuff. I love it. I love it. I'm gonna try to play it, even if it doesn't end up. I'm not expecting it to end up being a top tier deck, because maybe sometimes it's okay for a deck to just release in a state that's just really fun. You know, like maybe it doesn't need to be the best deck out there, right? Maybe it's better and healthier if we go at it from a different angle and we're just like, okay, well, this deck it looks really fun. You know, it looks really fun. I want to play it. And if it doesn't end up being the best deck in the format, which it won't, then that's okay. You know, that's okay. I'm just going to enjoy it anyways, right? And so that's where I stand on Mimigools. And it's got nothing to do with what I'm expecting from the second wave. You know, this is not like coping that they're gonna make it good, because obviously you can make any deck good if you just add 7 more really broken cards in the second wave. They can make it good if they want to, right? They can make it tier 1 in the next set if the next cards are insane, but we don't know that. The next wave for Mimigools might be incredibly disappointing. Who knows? I don't, but I like the concept. I'm gonna try and make it work, and I think I'm gonna have fun with it, and I think that's enough. I think maybe that's all the deck needs to do for now. You know, maybe that's fine. I'm a fan of it. I was happy when I saw these. I watched this video. I was like, that seems fun. I'm looking forward to this. And I feel like that's maybe all that matters with Mimighoul. Yeah, this does not work with the Runic. You never want to get rid of that field spell. That field spell's crazy. You're never putting Fountain over this.